Hello, Endeavor here. So tonight I'm here with two guests from the channel Orwell and Good. I'm here with Orwell and Good. How are you doing, Orwell?
I'm very good, thank you, Endeavor. How are you?
I'm doing great. It's good to have you back. And I'm here with his co-host, Question, aka the CEO of White People. How are you doing?
Very good. Thank you for having me.
So, what we're going to be talking about today is. Sorry, I'm just getting some feedback. One for 1 minute. Okay. What we're going to be talking about is the future of the United States, because I think that the United States in particular, it's the country that is the most emblematic of the trajectory that the entire West is on. And it seems to be ahead of the curve compared to other countries in Europe. But I think they're kind of all on the same trajectory. And it seems like all eyes are on America. So we'll be mostly focusing on the United States. But what we want to talk about is where's the country going after 2020? Because what my take on it is the United States as a united country is pretty much done for. I can't see any way that they can reconcile the current division, but the situation remains that it's still this huge, powerful geopolitical entity that has all the this military might and power and influence over all these areas of the world. So it's really going to be interesting to see what comes out of it. And my take is really that no matter what happens, it's going to get worse. I don't know exactly what it's going to happen, but all I know is that the situation in the United States is going to get worse regardless. So I guess I'll get you each of your takes on where you see the United States going. So Orwell, you can take away.
So yeah, on a social cultural level, I mean, the country's completely fractured. Everything is almost militantly politicized. You have the recent case with Goodyear, where they've done this thing to politicize Black Lives Matter and the LGBT movement, and then they kind of recoded it as just an apolitical cultural movement and politicize things like Blue Lives Matter, All Lives Matter, regardless if you support them or not. There's this little contrick that those are, some people might say, the cathedral, if they follow NRX doctrine, that they've politicized and then unpoliticized all of these desirable talking points. And what that has meant is that America has just become sort of divided between whether or not you are in the purview of the prevailing socially accepted politics. It just seems like on a cultural level, with the increasing diversification of the country aside, that the country is becoming more and more fractured. I was there last year, and it just seems to be a very sterile, boomerish white population in the cities. I was in Atlanta at the time, and then you had hyper-fertile newcomers who are posing a demographic threat to the majority, as we all know. Now, after 2020, who knows what's going to happen? Who knows what's going to be who's going to be elected? Of course, the projections might not be 100% accurate as 2016 dictated, but whatever happens, it's going to be very, very interesting. I think the straw that the final straw has broken the camel's back, and I think that there is no turning back from this point. There's just too many divisions that have come out to the fore, with the mainstream media deliberately piling fuel onto the fire to sour those divisions even more.
So, question: do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah. So I think demographics is the main trend that's going to determine the future of the United States. After the Trump years, we can clearly see that there is no real political will for sending them back, and the U.S. is going to become, at least parts of the U.S. will become an ethnic extension of Mexico. I used to think that balkanization was going to be inevitable. Now I kind of worry that that's a cope. That's people hoping that that there's going to be this kind of era where New England breaks away, and then New England can do, um, Manifest Destiny 2.0 kind of thing, Reconquista kind of thing. And I am not entirely sure. I've tried to figure out empirically when Americans will actually break away from their government, and organize en masse for themselves. And the answer that I get is when there's a lack of police presence. And, Mexican demographics don't give you a lack of police presence. They give you corrupt police. They might give you police slacking off, but they don't have a lack of police presence. And there aren't a lot of data points on that. So that could be an error, but the U.S. the IQ decline is going to be really brutal for the U.S., and we're not going to be able to project power like we used to be able to. For one example of this is we're going to lose the ability to field our carriers. So that the highest IQ job in the U.S. in the military is in the nuclear engineering, being a technician for a nuclear reactor on a Navy ship. And it's so high Q that when they get someone in there, they have to give them in for 6 years. They don't do like a 4-year tour like normal. They get them in for 6 years, and then they have to get them in school for 2 years to teach them how to do it. And what happens is these guys drop out immediately after their 6 years is up, because they get job offers of $100,000 plus, 6 figures plus, to go work at nuclear plants. So they're extremely scarce, and they have to give them large bonuses as well to do this. And you realize as the IQ drops, we're not going to be able to actually field these nuclear submarines or carriers simply from scarcity of these men, or more likely they'll compromise the quality of them, in which case we will no longer have a perfect nuclear Navy safety record, and then we won't be able to field them at all because it'll be too dangerous. After there's a reactor breach in the middle of the Pacific, and the entire carrier group is irradiated. Just something insane like that. So yeah, I kind of wonder if balkanization is a cope, but I think balkanization is still likely at this point.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. I'm just gonna say, if anyone would like to send donations, my channel is demonetized. Use Entropy. I put the link in the description. It's my first time using the platform, so if I have some boomer tech with Entropy, I apologize. But you can send some donations there if you're so inclined. In terms of the balkanization, I do think that that's the ideal situation, but I think that the problem is that the United States is currently governed by a force that is completely uninterested in that, because that would be giving up provinces of the Globo Homo empire. I remember a couple of weeks ago, I heard a couple right wingers talk on a podcast. I can't remember which one exactly, about California seceding from the United States, or a bunch of shit libs pushing for secession if Trump wins again. And I thought there's just no way that that's going to happen, because California seceding from the United States, that would be like Russia seceding from the USSR in 1960, or Austria seceding from the Austro-Hungarian Empire in 1880. They'd be giving up all of this. Because California, New York, and I guess London also are the capitals of the Globo Homo empire. So there's definitely no incentive from the left to want secession, which is why I think it's the ideal solution. But I don't think that it's going to come. It's not going to come without a fight. Like, there's not going to just be this, at least not in any time in the foreseeable future. They're not just going to say, okay, let's separate it and go our own ways. That'd be the most peaceful way to end it all. But one thing you had mentioned, which had been on my mind recently, is that when you listen to the Democratic presidential debates and from last year, and then you hear about like who's Biden going to choose as his running mate, and who are the Democrats going to be running in this district, whatever, who's this candidate going to be. And you pointed out how they're going to not have the IQ to maintain all of these very important cogs of the United States empire, like the aircraft carrier operators and stuff like that. But then when I listen to this, there's very little talk about their competency. It's which ones are going to be black women. the entire thing is just how can we get more black women? And it's like, and when they were talking about who's Biden's running mate going to be, he said, I have 4 black women. And like, is he going to choose a black woman? And then finally land on Kamala Harris, which, I mean, maybe she's not as bad as Stacey Abrams, but still, I mean, that's not necessarily an ideal choice. What you're going to end up with all these like affirmative action laws and with all of this push for more and more diversity, you're going to end up with this nuclear power, this huge military might under control of people who are just totally incompetent. And that is pretty frightening. What's going to happen when someone like Stacey Abrams is in charge of the biggest nuclear program in the world?
It will be telling if if she orders a general to nuke somewhere, I don't know what country she would order them to nuke, that she personally doesn't like, if they would have a coup, right then and there. And no, we're not going to nuke Norway, Stacey Abrams. I'm sorry. Or if they would just follow the orders. I'm not sure.
But from like a global homo military standpoint, I don't think bioleninism, and even they realize it, is a good long-term strategy for your military if you consider the American hegemony to be a going concern. There's no upside to stacking your military with people who don't know what gender they are as per each day of the week or whatever, or people who we've had the bar lowered for them in order to make up a diversity quota. At the end of the day, I think that the military higher-ups will do something to block such a proposal, even though they are trying to shoehorn some diversity hires to managerial positions. So I think it'll be quite interesting, but I think they'll also be met with a bit of resistance, even if you get some crazy ideologue like Stacey Abrams to call the shots.
Yeah, because I would think that the military would be at least the one institution that you wouldn't want bioleninism to work in, because that's the entire defense of your own power structure. You need a strong military in order to actually maintain the amount of control that they have. But right. Lo and behold, I've actually heard. Now I've never been in the military. I was actually considering it a couple of years ago until I kind of became more red-pilled, and I'm American, the Canadian military, until I became more red-pilled and realized, oh wait, this government hates my guts and wants me gone. I'm not fucking fighting for them. But I've heard that like this diversity stuff is in there too. I've heard that that these officers have to take courses on LGBT training and things like that, and the one thing that may actually be an underrated factor in the decline of America might be the foreign policy, the foreign policy angle, that they have this huge military might, but they've been in a war in Afghanistan for 20 years now, and they've lost to a bunch of poor farmers with AK-47s, and geopolitically, will kind of the military might of America really be drawn into question? Because you can have that military, but if it's just not effective at actually, if it's just not effective, then I think on the global scale, the United States would lose a lot of prestige in that respect.
Right, absolutely. And on more of a microcosmic scale, this is something we talk about at length on our streams, about how a lot of women who espouse these social justice positions were kind of shunted up into the upper echelons of the UK police's management in order to, shower the people on the beat, the bobbies, with all of this SJW propaganda, getting them to virtue signal, because a lot of the women who enter the police force aren't as physically competent as the men. And now the Greater London Police are seeking gender parity for those on patrol on the streets. In a city as dangerous as London has become in the last 60, 70 years, having half of your police officers on the ground being women up against a lot of people from, shall we say, less civilized places wielding machetes, well, that's just going to spell a recipe for disaster, unfortunately.
And not only that, they're saying in some of these cities like Chicago, we just need the social workers to go into the South Side. The reason that they're committing so much murders, it's because of the police. They just need more education. But I did think that the whole like abolish the police meme was kind of silly when they were talking about it back in May. My prediction back then was that what they were going to do was, instead of abolishing the police, because I still think that's just insane. I thought what they were going to do is put a diversity commissar in every single police department, who would essentially be the one who enforces anarcho-tyranny, the one who essentially guides the police in a political direction. But we haven't seen the abolishment of the police. But lo and behold, Nick Fuentes talked about this the other week, that basically you can look across the United States and a lot of these police departments have lost funding. In many cases, hundreds of millions of dollars. I heard that they're actually going to take $1 billion out of the budget of the NYPD. Now, because I definitely see the push for anarcho-tyranny in the police, and the police being ideological, but I don't see really where they're going with this, because this just sounds like they're going full on for just tyranny, or sorry, for just the anarchy angle here. The theory that Distributist put forward was that they're going to take the funding away and kind of use it as blackmail and give it back in return for ideological conformity. But I was just confused as where they were actually going with this, because you do see a huge crime spike in these cities like Chicago, New York, and a lot of that has to do with the cutbacks that have been made on the police. Like I've heard about how the plainclothes officers in New York would prevent a lot of the gun crime, because they would stop and frisk the usual suspects who would usually be carrying guns, and they prevent the crime from happening. But I think I've heard that department has been abolished. I'm 100% correct on that.
That's correct. And you had members from the black community demanding the NYP to reform that anti-crime task unit as well. So, I mean, people want that kind of stuff back, but it was done as this pallid gesture to say to New Yorkers that we have this commitment towards anti-racism no matter the cost.
Yeah. I guess I'll ask question, because you had said that you think that when the police are the abolishment of the police would be the thing that gets
the lack
Americans
of presence. The lack of presence. So the three data points that I could find were one during Katrina. So the Hurricane Katrina, for those who are a little bit younger, really messed up New Orleans, and they were without services for a while, and people actually formed essentially racially based militias, white militias, to keep black people from looting their neighborhoods. And the source for this was actually a liberal documentary where they were complaining about how racist this was, that they weren't letting black people into their neighborhoods. Just recently, the police were not going to defend the Alamo. They were going to allow Antifa to vandalize it, and a white militia formed to defend it. I suspect this was a call from the police to somebody that he knew, right? Like they got orders to not defend the Alamo, and they got called. And the third would be Rooftop Koreans, which is kind of a white adjacent psychologically group that the police cannot defend their businesses, so they're going to defend them themselves. So it's the lack of police, not necessarily the abolishment, but it is kind of in that direction. And I can't really find any other modern data points. That's just my attempt at trying to figure that out.
Mm-hmm. And where do you think that the defunding of the police is going to go? Because do you think that they're going to try to force ideology into it, or is it just going to weaken the police force?
So this is an interesting idea. Is that the fight for something like legalizing drugs, right? Legalizing drugs versus keeping them criminal is really an intergovernment fight between the medical sector and the law enforcement sector, right? So if you legalize drugs, cocaine, heroin, you're going to get a lot more medical jobs. You're going to get a lot more counseling jobs and a lot less jobs in the police department. So you can kind of see it that way, that it's police unions versus hospitals as lobbying organizations trying to control government to make more jobs for themselves. And so, yeah, this money is not going back to the taxpayer. I can tell you that. That this money is going to go to, as Moldbug would say, blue empire jobs. The things, the departments of the government that you would assume people would vote Democrat if they work there. They're going to be like they said, the social workers, psychologists who try to negotiate with an armed robber or something like that. Just madness.
Yeah, because I tend to think that the globalist model is New York or Los Angeles or London, which is like a city with a small number of hyper rich elites.
Yeah,
extremely high real estate prices, enormous wealth inequality, and this huge mass of multicultural, disunified consumers.
If I can interrupt for just 1 second.
Yeah, go ahead.
I saw this post. It was some liberal saying, if you vote for Donald Trump, the whole country is going to be like West Virginia. And someone replied, and it showed like a trailer park, with someone wearing a MAGA hat. And someone replied that West Virginia has a higher literacy rate than California. West Virginia has a higher standard of living, standard of living, I think, than California when you adjust for quality of life when you adjust for standard of living. West Virginia has a higher GDP than England. I mean, it's just like, what are you talking about? It's all kind of regional bigotry, but yeah, I just wanted to interject that. It's like, yeah, LA is their model.
but they're waithists, though.
Yeah, they're racists.
But the thing I was wondering, though, is I don't think that Detroit is their model. Like, I don't think that they want complete like dysfunctionality. But this whole like defund the police thing, like that seems to be the direction it's going. I don't know how. Yeah,
heard a neoliberal explanation for Detroit? Because I know that the socialist one is they'll blame the corporations, but I've never heard a neoliberal try to explain that. I'm just curious.
Stephen Crowder said that it was because of unions, which is insane.
Oh, okay. Well, that's a conservative.
Detroit has always been unionized. It was unionized back in the 20s and 30s, and in their Henry Ford years, didn't seem to be that bad back then.
But,
I wonder
but
what
that's
changed.
a conservative explanation. I mean, what would Bezos say? What would the Young Turks would say corporations, but I don't know.
I don't know. Not enough investment in it, or something like that.
Yeah, cities just burn to the ground when there's not enough investment. That's what happens.
Just kind of moving on, do you want to mention how Sweden's central bank bailed out Somalia's debt obligation to the IMF, and the rationale was because Somalia, given their current credit rating, couldn't secure long-term financing for much-needed infrastructure, which was what was miring them in poverty. It wasn't the demographic angle, but it was, in fact, the reason why they couldn't get any investments. So you learn something new every day.
Yeah. The other thing I wanted to mention was that because with the election, basically I see there's going to be there's going to be two possible outcomes. If Trump wins, you're going to get more riots. I think it's going to be equally as bad as it was in late May, early June, if not worse, if Trump wins. And you're going to get the entire you're going to get the entire iconoclasm all over again. It's going to be the same chaos across the country. But then if Biden wins, I think it's going to be just an absolute clampdown on anything right wing, and just like every corporation, every institution is going to have to follow diversity to a T. You're probably going to get hate speech laws, potentially even certain individuals getting thrown in jail. So I just feels like if Trump wins, you get the anarchy. If Biden wins, you get the tyranny. And I don't know which one's worse. I do think that it's better if Trump wins, for the reason that I know Trump's not going to do that much for us, but I think it gives us more time to organize and more time to build. Because I think that in order to actually have a real counter movement, I don't think you can just rely on the left being insane. You have to have something for people to turn to. And Trump gives us more time. But secondly, I think a lot of the anarchy can be blamed on the left. Whereas if Biden gets in, I do think there's going to be a clampdown, which is going to make it a lot harder for it's going to make it a lot harder for the right wing to operate. What would you guys say the result of the election is going to be? Because I mean, we've already seen this insane year in the United States, and we haven't even mentioned COVID yet. But what's going to come out of that? I guess I'll let Orwell go first.
Again, it's very, very difficult to determine who's going to win. Well, last time the Rust Belts were heavily influential in the elections, and with the dying boomer population in a lot of these areas, and a lot of these sort of deindustrialized areas really struggling with COVID. I don't know if they're going to cast their support behind Trump this time round, but I completely agree with your diagnosis that with Trump will come anarchy, with Biden will come the tyranny. And if you have anything that's remotely metapolitically on the right, they're just going to silence you straight off. And how far is it going to be? Because we've already seen these fringe publications condemn people for wanting to have a nuclear family structure. How long until the nuclear family is made illegal? Now you might think that as being a bit of a shitpost, but in the future, it might be entertained. Like a few years ago, the topic of reparations was a meme. Now you have literal economists trying to make calculations as to how much is owed to the descendants of slaves, which apparently is half of the national debt. And finally, there was a North Carolina council that actually voted on reparations to the Black community, but it didn't come in the form of stipends, but investment to infrastructure within that community. So these topics that we would have considered insane 4 or 5 years ago will probably gain more mainstream traction if Biden were to be elected. And I think there's a very high chance that he could be. And if Biden is elected, the mainstream media seems to be adamant that he's not going to stick around for too long. They might have let the cat out the bag with some of the very choice wording and a few tweets, which suggests that Kamala Harris might take the reins shortly after a potential Biden election.
And what do you think about that question?
It's hard to say, really. So my analysis has been for a long time that that the incumbent gets reelected unless something unusual happens. That's been the pattern in the United States since World War II. Something unusual has happened. The first unusual thing is a demographic shift. The second unusual thing is the coronavirus, which neither of those look very good for him. He has tried to make himself the economic president, the economic recovery president, and that has not worked out. And then on the other side, I think this source for this is Rasmussen. I was reading Twitter and I saw it, and I didn't save it, which I should have, but I think it's Rasmussen. and that's that there was a 0.95 correlation between gun ownership and voting Trump. First-time gun purchases is up 40%. So if you think about this from a neuropolitical perspective, that that right-wing people are more sensitive to threats emotionally, you can definitely see that these riots have really shifted people. And so you can slowly see Trump climbing in the polls today. Well, when these riots started, I remember seeing that leftists just denied their existence. They would stand in front of burning buildings and say that these are peaceful. Now, Black Lives Matter activists are coming out and saying that there was one today that Zero Heads retweeted out that this guy said that it's okay for black people to loot stores because white people steal oil and diamonds. You know, just like if you had a movie where a black guy was making these kinds of moral arguments, you'd be called racist. You know? Go ahead.
Well, no, because that was actually something that was on my mind today as well. It was just that the morality and kind of the psychology of the ideology that's dominant in the West today. I was gonna when I tweeted this out a few days ago and again today, I was gonna say the left, but I stopped myself and I just said the dominant morality, and it's that they consider this metaphysical entity of racism. They consider that's kind of their only real value that they hold. And what racism really means is just anything that's good for white people. So the only real value that the modern left holds, and by extension, that being the only real moral code in the West today, is being anti-white. And the two things that I saw in this past week, which led me on to this, and I was considering maybe making a BitChute exclusive video about this. One of them was the tragic case of Canon Hinnant. His mother felt inclined, and I don't blame her at all, because knowing the climate, I don't blame her for doing this, but she felt it necessary to defend that the boy was not racist, as if even if he was, that would it wouldn't have been a horrific crime nonetheless. So even if the boy was quote unquote racist, obviously it's a horrendous crime, I would imagine, and not justified no matter what. The second one I saw was the man in Oregon who was assaulted and nearly killed. He was kicked in the head. There was this really shocking video of him just lying on the ground unconscious. And today, the New York Post tweeted out that hours before he was assaulted, he had posted an anti-George Floyd meme on Facebook. And what this implies is that it was justified, because I can't imagine if the mainstream media would say, like, let's just say theoretical situation happens. I know that this just is extremely rare, but let's say a right-winger beats up a leftist. Would the mainstream media ever say, well, this person tweeted about Black Lives Matter just hours before they got brutally assaulted? Of course not, because it shouldn't matter. Isn't it wrong to brutally assault someone? But what this article is suggesting, they don't say this right away, but I mean, they don't flat out say this, but what it's implying is that the assault was justified because he was quote unquote racist. And it just seems like the morality that they have now, they don't really have any kind of abstract values. It's really just being anti-white. And in the case of the Black community, and it's just racial dominance. Anti-racism equals racial dominance for them. And the small group of elites who we cannot mention, it means the Swiss, the Swiss bankers, let's just say, anti-racism is what keeps them in power. It creates their bioleninist structure, which they're at the top. And then for like the white shit libs, it's just like this religious kind of fervor that they've just been taught since kindergarten that waithism is the worst thing in the world and that they're a virtuous person by being anti-waithist. So yeah, what do you guys think about like just how it seems like morality has just been completely flipped on its head, and there's really little. You can't even debate with someone like this because they've come to the conclusion that you're evil because you're white, and there's no conversation to be had.
Right, and I actually spoke about this yesterday on our stream about how they've kind of raised any real moral equivalences. We got the case from the UK, Shamina Begum, who was like a teenage girl. I believe she was originally Bangladeshi, who left the UK to fight for ISIS, and now she's begging to return home. You have all of these bleeding heart shitlibs in the UK who say, "Oh, well, we all made mistakes when we were 15, and yada yada yada. We should be more clement towards her. We should let her in and let her have a day in court." And the other one I saw yesterday or the day before was in September, a group of teens in italics in Maryland beats a white man to death at a fairground over $1. And one of the teens responsible for this beating, which led to this man's death, was let off with anger management and probation. And the teen's attorney was, as question is called, a Swiss. And the judge overseeing it was this butch, lesbianic, suspiciously childless woman. And it's a case of, oh well, whenever one of our emotional surrogates for the children we never had acts out and does something bad, you should feel guilt because you too made mistakes when you're 15. I'm sorry, when I was 15, I might have smoked cigarettes and drank a 40 on a park bench, but I never killed anyone. I never went off overseas to join a violent terrorist organization. And these shitlibs are trying to guilt you into believing that the two things are morally equivalent, that all mistakes are the same as long but you can be exculpated from your mistakes as long as you are of the right demographic or political group.
Yeah, question. Would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah, the morality thing is really interesting. They really have created a structure, a thought structure that's very similar to religion. So Ayn Rand had this kind of philosophical stack that she introduced in her West Point graduation speech that you can find online. And in it, she talks about how it's epistemology, then it's metaphysics, then it's morality. So we find out what is true, then we find out what is true, and then we find out what we do about it. And I kind of looked at this, and it kind of bothered me because I realized that not everyone does this. When people have kind of these very insistent moral beliefs that they refuse to change in the face of new evidence, what they're doing is they're putting morality first, and then metaphysics, and then epistemology. So if your morality, if the facts contradict their morality, they assume that the facts are wrong because morality is first. And that's how I see what they're doing. That it's a religious-like structure that they really can't be persuaded out of it because, if you try to argue them out of it, then you are a bad person. Yeah, you're a bad person. It marks you as immoral, and the harder you argue with them about it, the more immoral you are. And I mean, you can ask some probing questions to these people, like, what is the benefit of not being racist? What is it supposed to try to get you? Are racist civilizations bad places to live in for the predominant race? Like if you had the Nazis and you just left them alone in a homogenous society, would that be bad for Africans? These kind of probing questions like that, and none of this makes any sense. It's all just kind of a thing that they assume, and I think there's probably a lot of people who are not really genuine about it. I saw an Ed Dutton video today that was pretty interesting on how people who signal more about being moral are actually higher in sociopathic traits and they're higher in neuroticism. So they're actually worse people. They're, so when you see these people going on and on about it, it really is like that. But they've also taken over the churches. I saw today that the Episcopalian Church now says that white people steal people's land and enslave people, and they're not using past tense. They're not citing a historical event. They're talking present tense, and like Orwell was saying, it's this ogress with short hair who's lecturing you about morality.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that I saw this thread on Twitter last year, which I wish I had screenshotted it. They went over the 10 Commandments, and they came to the conclusion that besides murder, and this one's even started to become questionable, racism is punished harder than than violating all 10 of the other 10, or sorry, all 9 of the other 10 commandments. And like I said earlier, I think that I'm actually starting to think that, though they might still punish murder more strictly just so that, society doesn't descend into complete anarchy. But do they consider murder or do they consider being racist worse than murder? Because I remember I heard this story about these teenagers who had posted like a bunch of racial slurs on social media or something like that. I heard that they of course, got kicked out of their school or something like that, or expelled. I can't remember. But what I found was interesting was that their parents were punished for it. So like their parents were fired from their job because their children had posted this,
which is anti-liberal.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, but I mean, I can't remember any of the parents of school shooters being forced out of their job if their child committed mass murder. Now, someone can correct me on that. I mean, maybe I know that like the Columbine parents had to like leave their town. I think they changed their names and stuff like that. I mean, for obvious reasons, but I can't think of like any. I can't think of any like crime that someone has committed that their family member is being punished for in the same way that racism is, or how the officer who did not murder Rashard Brooks, who shot him after he had stolen a taser and fired it at him and resisted arrest, and basically it was like completely justified. Not only was he charged with murder, a capital offense in the state of Georgia, but his family members were fired also. Like it's
but the Wendy's
insane.
Was burnt down. The location of the shooting was burnt down. It's madness.
And you know what? Like when it comes to the radical egalitarianism that we see, which is inherent within liberalism, you and your family members could be genetically affected by by racism, but things such as intelligence, strength, political views can't be passed down genetically, according to the mainstream consensus. You also have that NASCAR racer who I think he got blacklisted because his dad might have dropped the N-bomb decades prior to this revelation. But one of the other narratives that I see them spinning is the fact that the trauma from slavery can be passed down intergenerationally. The trauma from redacted historical events can also be passed down genetically, but IQ can't be.
I mean, like, and not only that, like the stories just become more and more ridiculous. I mean, it's only going to be probably a year or two before we hear that, Southern slave owners used to drink the blood out of slaves from their skulls.
I saw some Kang on Twitter saying that white people used to make chairs out of black people's skin.
And wallets.
Submit the chair. Show us the chair. I can't wait to see the chair. Where's the chair? There's no chair.
Yeah, and I think that this also plays into what Orwell had mentioned at the beginning, that absolutely everything in America is politicized now. And what got me thinking about this was sports. And I was actually considering doing a BitChute video about sports as well, because it's basically, to me, it's dead. Like, there's just no way I can watch this and actually be entertained. Being Canadian, I'm a fan of hockey. No surprise, but well, I was. I saw this game. Like, I didn't see the game, but I saw the pictures of it on social media. And before the game, they had no one in the stands because of coronavirus. And all the billboards, all the jumbotrons had the words "end racism." We skate for Black lives, and they're like standing in this circle around the center with this Black activist kneeling down and these two Black players, which there's very few of in the NHL, by the way. I think there were the only two, and in these two teams combined, like with their hands on his shoulder, and this like looks like a religious ceremony of some kind.
Mm-hmm.
And this is also a big problem, that everything is being politicized, but there's absolutely no discourse going on. So it's politicized, but only insofar as it comes to this one conclusion. Like, you can't come to any other conclusion other than, Black people are the victims and white people are human scum. And, you say anything about it, then you're canceled. So I just find you get into this problem where literally you can't have anything anymore. You can't even watch you can't even watch your sports ball anymore. The things that used to distract you from all of these problems, you can't even do that anymore because it's in there now too. It's insane.
And the Bubba
like,
Wallace debacle. Remember that?
Yeah, with NASCAR.
Yeah. It's so someone put a doll noose in there. It's like, no, that's the handle for the thing.
Yeah. Go ahead, Orwell.
I was just going to move on. Somebody said something in the chat about 10 minutes ago about how Islam has almost been impenetrable for social justice propaganda. If you've looked on Twitter today, Netflix has come out with a new drama which is called Cuties, and it heavily involves the challenges faced by people of the Islamic faith and their traditions when westernized. Now, a lot of people have called this a very sexual drama because it involves 4 11-year-old girls who have found a new penchant for twerking, and there's a snippet of them dancing scantily clad on stage. And one of the ways that the so-called cathedral, globo home, or whatever you want to call it, manages to corrupt and destroy more orthodox traditions such as Catholicism, the Orthodox Church, and Islam is through the promotion of sex, but sex or sexualizing teenagers and prepubescent children. I've noticed this in Brazil, which is a very Catholic country, even though it has got a very strong LGBT movement and they are very sexually prurient in some areas. But you'll see a lot of sexualization of teenagers and prepubescent children on their TV. For example, some of the music that they have is very sexually explicit in nature, and you'll see a bunch of scantily clad 12 and 13-year-old girls dancing around on stage, and it's packaged to you as being cute. I live in Chile, the same thing applies here, and lo and behold, the out of wedlock birth rate is 75%, 76% last year. So 76% of all children are born out of wedlock in Chile. So the job of the global home is practically done over here. Nobody's getting married anymore. Divorce rates are through the roof. Divorce rates among older citizens are through the roof. So what you'll see, especially in more Islamic countries, slowly but surely they'll start targeting these audiences by putting very overt sexual themes involving minors into their programs in order to program and condition the population into becoming more desensitized to this kind of propaganda.
Yeah, I saw this meme today from, I think it was from Leftist Twitter or some LGBT group or something like that. And they had this image of like 8 different kids shows which had homosexual couples in them. So, they are really, getting it in through the media. The one question that I also thought of is that I think that that what you can look at historically is that usually the drift to the left, it ends with a restoration of order. And now that might sound good to a right winger, but it isn't always actually that good because if you look at something like Russia after the Russian Revolution, it eventually did stop shifting left. Like, Stalin was probably where it stopped the shift to the left. And of course, what you got was a hugely centralized and very brutal tyranny from that. But it did actually put an end to kind of the chaos of the revolutionary years and the years of the Civil War and the years of famine and things like that. Of course, there's plenty of starvation in the Stalin years, but it definitely like stopped shifting left. So I wouldn't say that. I would say that as he actually existed, like in the early years of the Soviet Union, they had all of this like degeneracy, homosexuality, and stuff like that, and then Stalin eventually just said enough of this shit, and he said we're going to have the traditional family. And the French Revolution, it was Napoleon, which was, I think, a lot better of a result in that case. But you saw that it go from the early French Revolution, the very liberal phase, then to the radical phase where they were starting to cut everyone's heads off, and then it was anyone who was just not far enough to the left was chopped. And then you saw that with the Mensheviks in the Russian Revolution as well. Mm-hmm. But then there's kind of like this abrupt stop, and there's someone that comes in and restores order. Now, I think that could be the end result of the situation in the United States, but I'd say that I don't think that's going to happen within I'd be shocked if that was Donald Trump. I think that, he has shown that he's just not willing to do that. But I also kind of do feel a lot of it still hasn't actually gotten that bad yet, because one thing Devin Stack had pointed out on a stream he did this week was that a lot of this still is LARP. Like, I do think the entire George Floyd movement and all this chaos, which is very chaotic, it is all manufactured. Like Devin Stack pointed out that, this Antifa soy boy got shot in the leg with a rubber bullet, and he's like on the ground, like as if he's in Saving Private Ryan, and they put like something in his mouth for him to bite on. He's like writhing in pain when, this is something that, you'd just be like a bruise that, would be sore for a couple of days. And it does kind of just feel like it's still LARP. In many ways.
That's theater. It's not LARP, it's theater. So, I mean, you see them giving him the thing to bite on, but the other part is there's someone with a camera.
And they applied a tourniquet as well.
Yeah. So they're trying to make sure all of this is recorded. And there's a lot of things that they do that are very theatrical in this sense. So one thing they'll do is they'll assault someone. And I've seen two different cases of this where they assault someone and actually kick out their teeth or knock them to the ground, and then their medics come up to them. And this kind of duality of Antifa, where they'll beat you up and then give you a Band-Aid, means they always have plausible deniability as an organization in any of these attacks, because they can always say that the medics are the real Antifa, and the people who just kicked out this guy's teeth, where he has like jagged triangles where his teeth used to be, that those people are fringe elements. They don't know who they are, and they just showed up to the rally. And we can see this with I think a couple of weeks ago there was that naked woman that was walking in front of the police, or all of these women who will twerk at the police. So they're all trying to get these photos. It's the exact opposite of what liberals used to say, that the revolution will not be televised. The revolution is being live streamed, and it's planned live streams. It's not just live streaming what's actually happening.
Yeah, but I do think though that it hasn't gotten to the point. It hasn't really gotten to the point yet that I think it's actually as real as we may perceive, because I could see things getting a lot worse, especially if Biden gets in. I do wonder though, like, what will there actually be a point where people who's come in and say, enough of this, let's actually have we need to restore order. And I don't know who that would be, because I look at something like Chaz. Like Chaz was extremely violent. Caused several people were murdered, plenty of rapes, plenty of assaults, property damage. But ultimately, it was playing, really. It wasn't serious. It wasn't a serious threat to anything, really. I mean, I think that the only reason that it actually lasted as long as it did was because the the municipal government and the politicians over in Seattle, they're anti-Trump, and to go in and crack down on it would be seen as I guess doing Trump's bidding or something like that, and allowing Chaz to exist was kind of an FU to Trump. But then
no, that they planned that. That was all planned.
You think it was planned?
They called out the police. They called the police away from that precinct and allowed them to gather around it.
Oh, okay.
I mean, that was all planned, but I think the actual purpose of that was much more insidious, and that is to establish a precedent that hippies, can just take over a part of the city and declare it independent from the United States, and nothing happens. And so you can imagine them doing this for longer and longer periods of time, in larger and larger areas, and because of the previous precedents, it's okay. And to further the thing that this was planned, was the city was actually giving them porta potties and then picking them up and cleaning them, or sending the cleaning trucks to go clean the porta potties and giving them food. I mean, it's government action through non-government means. It's utterly bizarre.
Yeah, because I just thought Chaz was just fake and gay. Like, it was entirely disingenuous. None of this was actually in opposition to anything.
Well, Chaz and the Portland Autonomous Zone were both these sorts of local government shit tests to see what they can get away with. Like, a child will throw a tantrum and demand all of these things to see how much of the stuff they can get in return without the person in authority clamping down on them. The Seattle mayor actually told Trump it would be unconstitutional and illegal to send in the National Guard to clear out Chaz. And it was just incredibly quick how that precinct was evacuated, and then for this anarchist commune to just appear in a matter of hours, it just kind of boggles the mind. And in Portland, they finally sent in riot police to dissolve the anarchist commune down there when it threatened to encircle the mayor's condominium. So they kind of have like this Frankenstein's monster which they can use at a whim, but when it comes to attack them, they have to shut it down.
Yeah, some of the guys in the chat are saying your volume's a bit low, Orwell. Maybe you could turn it up a bit. Okay. I just want to say thanks to the Thin Red Line. He sent $5. All the best for my American brothers and sisters. If you'd like to donate, you can on Entropy. That's links in the description. I definitely think that it's important it's too easy for right wingers to get caught up in things like BLM. Well, BLM is a bit more institutional support, but things like Chaz or Antifa, one of the biggest mistakes people make is they think that they're going to bring about communism. When that's really not what they do at all. They are just the shock troops of the establishment, and they only are allowed to operate insofar as they actually advance that agenda, like you mentioned. The second that
interesting point from the chat, Enduro says, if anyone remembers the LA riots, a lot of Republicans won local elections after, like Giuliani. That just wanted to say that really quick. Sorry.
Yeah, I was gonna. We'll get on to that in a few minutes. But it's important to keep in mind that all these street activists, they are under the control of the cathedral, so to say. They are the pawns of the establishment, and they can only act insofar as they enact that agenda. Like what I've often pointed out is what does Antifa actually do? It's, I'd say, 1% is actually trying to do a revolution. 5% is street protesting, and 94% is trying to dox right wingers on the internet, trying to get them fired from their jobs. It's the ideological police. They're the unofficial ideological police, really.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the paid hall monitors. That's what they are.
Yeah, well, they're unpaid hall monitors. They're the ones who do it for free.
A lot of them get paid, but well, fair enough. But that's probably a good assessment that the vast majority of them just spend their time basically doing like a lefty poll LARP where they just dox people for the wrong opinions. Endeavor, I'm curious to hear your take as to why you feel like people who are members of Antifa have this cognitive dissonance between their anarchist ideals and basically the ideological alignment that they have with neoliberalism.
I've tried to actually have this conversation with a lot of them before, and what ends up happening is you just get blocked right away. I think it's because their ideology has been subverted. Leftist politics since World War II have gone entirely away from class struggle and entirely away from Marxism, at least the traditional Marxism, and entirely towards race. Because they when they were in kindergarten, they weren't being taught that bankers are the most evil people in the world. CEOs are the most evil people in the world. No, they're being taught that racism is the worst thing in the world. And I feel like that they've very effectively kind of redirected the far left away from what it would have been 100 years ago, that being like the working class, class struggle, and bringing about revolution. They've directed it away from that in toward racial politics. How does the Antifa member actually justify it? I'm honestly starting to be more and more baffled at how they can possibly think that they're rebels when Jeff Bezos is donating hundreds of millions of dollars to racial equality and LGBT trash and stuff like that. Like his wife, who's now I think the richest woman in the world just by from divorcing Jeff Bezos, gave $500 million to this racial equality crap. It's just insane, the amount of money that's behind this. And I'd say that they've just really built up this religion, really, this anti-white religion, and Antifa are really just kind of the zealots about it, the religious zealots. And I'd say that's kind of how they maintain that cognitive dissonance. But I could have understood how they did that, how they would how they have that connection in their mind maybe 6-7 years ago. But in the era of woke capital, or at least woke capital finally being honest about it, I don't know how any intelligent person can actually think that being on the left and being an Antifa, you're a rebel. But lo and behold, we still have that. I guess it just boils down to religion, really.
Yeah. I think there's a very strong degree of religiosity within Antifa, and the blue waves of white shit libs that support progressive politics. It comes out of this sort of nihilistic materialist vacuum that we see. And just following on from that, I honestly think that if a party were to come out, like a social nationalist conservative party, so basically the Labour Party of the 1950s, in any Western country, they'd wipe the floor with their opposition. Yeah,
because I think that what the left, well, I say the left, I'm actually referring to a certain group here. What they did after World War II was they realized that Marxism was not a viable strategy to destroy the West. First of all, because people were too wealthy by then. The incentive for a worker in 1945 who could, in the United States, let's say, who could, afford a house, 3 children, a wife, a car on a working class salary, what reason would he have to want revolution? He wouldn't. There'd be no incentive for it. So the group that wants to destroy the West, they shifted from class struggle and Marxism to anti-white politics, to diversity and cultural Marxism, if we want to use that phrase. They shifted that to anti-white politics and mass immigration and critical race theory, and basically what we see now, intersectionality. And that has proven to be a much more effective strategy, because basically they have this endless horde who they have this endless horde who they can just import en masse, who are just fiercely loyal to the bioleninist structure. And I'd say that, yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, just right. But there's almost been like an inversion as to what you're saying. I completely agree with the mass immigration, anti-whiteness, and intersectionality, just completely undermining white majority population. But the kind of the alpha ethno-narcissists of the progressive left have kind of reintroduced the topic of class struggle, but with racial overtones inserted within it in order to demand more power and resources to their in-group.
Yeah, and what you also saw in the early 20th century is that in terms of the white working class, it actually is a lot more effective to rally them along the lines of ethnicity and nationality and things like that. And that what if given the right options, like you mentioned, a nationalist populist movement. I mean, I know Donald Trump was a disingenuous one. He ran on that, but he didn't actually enact any of it. The white middle classes and the white working classes will actually side with the right. The white masses, let's just say, will actually side with the right in class solidarity instead of class struggle. So that's why I'd say that the kind of the old Marxism is really just dead and outdated and really has no chance of coming back. And why they just can't go back to that. They have to go with the racial angle from the perspective of the left.
Yeah. I mean, it's all they have now, and now they're going to have the numbers to basically back up their intersectional movement. And I don't know if you've seen the recent propaganda to come out of like all of these intersectional groups. Now they're starting to downgrade Asians as not being people of color.
Yeah, that's interesting, because what I actually thought was eventually they were going to be the global homo middle managers, because they'd actually want someone that's actually, somewhat competent, like Question said at the beginning, running the aircraft carriers or something like that. But that will be interesting what they do with that. Will that be a threat? Will that be a threat to the intersectional stack, or will it be someone who they can just hire as mercenaries? Because one thing you can see is that, in Google in California, it's full of a bunch of transsexuals and a bunch of Indians out there. And I do wonder, will Asians kind of act as the high IQ aspects of the left, the ones that are actually, somewhat competent, or will they be pinched out as well? I mean, from a strategic standpoint, it would seem that it would make more sense to actually use them in that regard. Like, one thing is, in Canada, for example, there's a large Asian population. They're not, they're not like committing like huge amounts of crime or stuff like that, but they're not exactly loyal to the native white population. They're kind of they're kind of a bit in between, but if it benefits them, they'll give in to anti-white politics just to get ahead. But I do wonder about that. Will they actually use kind of the high IQ migrants as their global homo middle managers, or will they eventually be cast out as being privileged as well? I mean, what would your take on that be?
Well, it kind of depends. I mean, you got people like Sarah Jong who are, avowedly anti-white, but then go around sleeping with exclusively just white men. And there was that case with a Cambridge professor in the UK. You have Cyber Rao. All of them tend to be rabidly anti-white, but then shack up with white men. One thing I wanted to quickly add when it came to your growing Asian demographic in Canada is the fact that we know that a lot of East Asians have their own kind of manifest destiny or will to power, whatever you want to call it. And one of the greatest errors I've noticed from the neoliberal center is to extend this cordiality to all of these divergent groups and assume that they act in good faith towards the new host nation, which is just markedly untrue.
It
never happens.
Yeah. What I can see with the Asians, both South Asians and East Asians, is that they will do this kind of global homo stuff very readily. I think they have a lot of cognitive dissonance is not the right word, but they have a lot of alienation from living in a country that is not racially their own. They don't see themselves on the television, and I think that really messes with kids. First generation immigrants don't really care. If an adult man moves to Japan, it's fine. But when you get these second and third generation Chinese kids who will just complain about all these things, or even worse are the racially mixed ones, apparently. As we can see from our Asian masculinity, it's just crazy. But at the same time, I do see them being pushed out from the kind of the inner circle that no, you're white adjacent, and we can kind of see this with Idi Amin, right? Like he kicked out all the whites, and then he kicked out all the South Asians, all of the Indians. You can see this in South Africa, where whites are Asians, but or whites are racist, but also Asians are racist. All of these Indians who came over when the Brits still controlled South Africa to do kind of skilled labor jobs, they're racist too. The coloreds is what they called them, I think. And we can see this in like the LA riots that it's not this friendly alliance of non-whites. There really is a lot of intergroup struggle between them, especially Hispanics and blacks. They geographically displace each other. They really don't like each other very much. But at the same time, the Asians will do things like that in Canada. That one brown guy, that one Indian guy, he did that Brown Power song.
He's the worst. Are you talking about Jasmeet Singh?
Yeah. Well, I don't know what his name is.
The worst.
Yeah, and then there's another guy who did a Mix It Up song about race mixing.
Oh my God! I remember that one.
But they'll very readily latch onto this stuff. But I mean, it's weird. They're setting up a caste system.
Yeah, like Jasmeet Singh. Like a lot of people thought, he's a Sikh politician. He's the leader of our third biggest political party in Canada. He's viciously anti-white. Like for example, he'll scream at somebody for not like supporting anti-racism legislation or something like that in the chamber of MPs or something like that. And yeah, one thing you will see is they will like give in to global homo if it benefits them. I actually have a friend a Taiwanese friend who lives in Toronto. I thankfully don't live there anymore, but he used to say, "Oh yeah, Asians will never give in to this whole LGBT trash." But then I sent him this picture of the Toronto Asian LGBT club, and then he's just like, "No!" But yeah, it gets them too. But the other thing I wanted to mention was. Like you had said that I should have said this earlier, but yeah, like in the intergroup conflicts, that it's almost like they don't even care about anti-racism. Doesn't actually care about genuine racial hatred. Blacks and Hispanics are allowed to hate each other as much as they want. They're allowed to,
But was it Orwell? We saw Armenians and Kurds fighting in Tennessee. Remember that?
No. It was Hispanics and Kurds fighting in a school in Tennessee or Kentucky. I can't remember which. In a high school in Kentucky, and there was also Afghans and Eritreans shooting each other in drive-bys in refugee camps in northern France. So diversity presents you with a wonderful opportunity where people who would never, ever, ever have any interaction with one another get to knock the stuffings out of each other in your homelands, ad infinitum. The other one that I recently saw was because of coronavirus, suspected rapist, we know he did it, suspected rapist got released because of coronavirus fears, and he killed his accuser a few days later. This dude was of North African extraction, and his victim was a Venezuelan woman who had no family in America. And this happened in Alexandria, Virginia. So, your countries become battlegrounds for all of these interethnic squabbles. And furthering on from that, the point I just wanted to get in, I mean, one of the woke intersectional futures that we see will resemble evolution, that if you don't pass the equivalent of a paper bag test with a few shades darker, you're just going to get iced by a bunch of woke radical intersectionalists. I mean, you got the case of South Africa at the moment, where now that they're kind of losing a bit of energy on the white people, they've turned their frustrations towards the Indian population that seemed to do quite well over there too, and then they take their frustrations out on Nigerians, Malawians, and other Africans who do better economically than South African blacks there at the moment. It got to the point where Boko Haram was actually threatening to wage war on South Africa because they had singled out so many Nigerian immigrants.
I want to know how they would get down there. Probably NGO boats. These refugees from Nigeria need to get to South Africa so they're safe.
Yeah.
Meanwhile,
because there's white people in South Africa, they have to let them in.
Meanwhile, the boat is just full of these Nigerian men doing pull-ups, polishing their machetes. It's like, we must make war on the South African.
So, what someone had mentioned earlier that after the LA riots, there was a groundswell of support for Republican candidates in the area. And what I wanted to talk about was, I guess, a reaction to this, because, I think that a few things for it to actually be effective, because, getting a couple more votes for the Republicans is only marginally effective. It might get you a couple of, it might keep a couple of woke feminist WOCs out of office who, want to force you to pay reparations or something like that. But ultimately, there does actually need to be a much stronger reaction to that. I think that there's two things that people need to realize. One is that there's not really any that the people in power right now, the governing ideology is it's dead set on its course, and there's really no arguing with it. Like what convinced me of that last week was, I saw this news headline and about Toronto, where I'm from, and it said they're doing an investigation to anti-Black racism in the police force in Toronto. And I thought, and before I even read the article, I thought, what conclusion are they going to come to other than it's because that the police are anti-Black and it's because of white people? And then that's the only conclusion that they possibly could come to. And if they came to any other conclusion, then that would just be evidence that they were even more racist and that they were in denial of their own racism. So, I just look at these councils, these diversity initiatives, and there's only one conclusion that they come to, and it's an anti-white one. So it's important to just first of all realize that the system you're living under is anti-white, and and I think the other thing is that the center right really needs to be replaced with people that have sympathies with the far right, or the dissident right, as we might call it. And how do you see the reaction to this playing out? Would you say that there actually is? Because I do have a few. I have seen a few positive signs. Would you say that there is a big reaction to it? Is it leaning more towards Trump and to the GOP, or is there actually some dissident right ideas that are getting in there? I'll let question. What do you think about that?
That's a good question. I do see more people kind of running for office that have these ideas and are adjacent to these ideas. But at the same time, that guy from Iowa, who was that guy? He was the one that said, we don't need to bring in immigrants. We'll bring up our own birth rates, our own children. And a lot of Swiss people were very angry at him for this.
Oh, yeah.
I'm sure someone in the chat will bring it up in a second. Well, he lost his primary.
Oh, really?
Yeah. He got primaried out, and the GOP backed the guy who challenged him. It was like the first genuinely semi-identitarian thing that I've seen come out of the GOP in forever. And I think this guy was just kind of talking out loud and not really even realizing that he had stepped on Steve King. Yeah. Thanks to Saint Germain in the chat for reminding me. So it's, I'm trying to think of any mainstream characters. There is Tucker. I mean, people, I think they put a lot more faith in Tucker than what's necessarily warranted. That there is this weird kind of effect where right-wing people, our enemies are corporations. Those are our political enemies now. And they kind of confuse economic egalitarianism with with just pragmatically being against these people because they are your enemies, and it's so there is this kind of weird effect where people try to speak ill of Disney, but they end up actually making kind of anti-corporate statements, and I kind of wonder if that's what's going on with Tucker, or if he actually is kind of doing a more traditional populist position, as it were. Overall, I think no, it's not influencing mainstream commentators. Maybe more people. It's definitely influencing more people. I mean, you go to these streams online, and they'll have some kind of, or here's a good example from today. The FBI posted the Elders of Zion, kind of FBI FBI archives bot, and about, I would say, an eighth of the comments were blue check marks who were outraged, and the rest of the comments were people who were yucking it up, who thought this was hilarious that they posted this. And so you can definitely see that we're reaching at least kind of control of these things. I don't want to say control, but
meta politics, really, not necessarily electoral, but meta politically, there's some victories being had.
Yeah, or here's a good example. Today, I was on YouTube and I saw that the Ayn Rand Institute had a live stream going, and there were 61 people watching it live. But if you go to like a Catboy Cammy live stream where he's trolling people in blackface, you can get like 6,000 people watching that live. I think the last time I was watching it, it was like that. It was just like, oh, which one of these movements has more momentum? I wonder. Let's see.
I refuse to watch Catboy Cammy, but
why do you refuse? He's actually pretty funny.
I don't know. Not my too many streams already. Too many in my playlist. But
I'm going to send you a clip, like a 1-minute clip of Catboy Cammy, and then you can tell me if you think he's good or not. Okay, I'll send it to you after this stream.
Yeah, just like how the bankers get you hooked on the I'm just kidding.
Cheap loans.
Yeah. But no,
just a taste for you. Okay, don't worry about it. It'll be fine.
Yeah, this is actually my record for viewers on a stream. I got over 400 tonight. So yeah, there definitely is a shift in that direction. I guess I'll
about 7 times better than the Ayn Rand Institute.
Yeah. How many did they get? Did you say
they got 61? They had 61 live views. It was just like, oh my god.
Libertarians BTFO'd.
Yeah.
I hate libertarians. One of my favorite things online is dunking on libertarians, because like with the left you can do it, but they are still in power. With libertarians, just like they're just pathetic. But I'll hand it over to Orwell. Do you see any positive shifts in our direction?
Yeah, in the last 2 months, I mean, there've definitely been new recruits to the so-called boomer waffen. I've seen people, the picture, the selfie that they take sat in their truck wearing a baseball cap and sunglasses. I've seen a ton of people with those kind of avatars just literally full-on Fed posting beneath all of these crimes. So I think the narrative that the Dinesh D'Souzian Democrats are the real racist narrative is kind of crumbling in front of them. I think people don't really care anymore because there's just the inevitable component in a lot of these attacks, which you see on almost a daily basis on social media. The mainstream media just completely glosses over. For example, with Cannon Hinnon, I must have seen dozens of boomer tier accounts just basically talking about how there are no political solutions, how Trump hasn't done enough. So I think that the worm has turned. The George Floyd riots was just like the turning point, no pun intended, of sort of mainstream right-wing politics. As I always point out, the Overton window hasn't necessarily exclusively just shifted to the left. It's expanded. People on the right are seemingly pushing further rightwards in their social views. I think that slowly but surely the wheels on this liberal train are becoming undone.
Before we go back to you, Endeavor, one thing I'd like to say is that we really did have kind of a post-racial. We didn't have like a really post-racial, time, right? It's always been racial, but a post-racial generation that was attacked harder than ever before for being white, and that's what this backlash is. So it was around the Obama years, and it's hard to figure out because a lot of people thought that that when Obama was elected, this was the end of racism, and I think there's two narratives around this. The first is that they really wanted to keep milking the cow and attacking white people, and they didn't want them to think this was the end of racism. In fact, racism has never been worse. Something ridiculous like that. But on the other side, I think it's like, okay, now we have enough power that we can do what we've always wanted to do. But that's what all of this is just relentlessly attacking these young people, youngish people for some of us, like never before, for being white, where we have, we've personally never really done anything to these people. The last lynching happened in the 80s. You don't know anyone who's done anything to these people, and yet they continue to attack us constantly. Physically attack us, verbally attack us, morally attack us in all forms of media. And I think what's going to happen is that it's going to get worse, and that means that, these ideas are going to become very standard for young white people. I mean, no one wants to hear how they're evil all the time, and I think it's going to spread into, white liberal women. I mean, how much can you really be called a white feminist till you start saying, yes, I'm a white feminist, and white feminists are better than black feminists. We actually get things done. We actually get rights done. We actually get legislation done. Until you start,
maybe in that respect, they're worse than black feminists.
Yeah. I mean, I agree, but that's the beginning of some kind of racial pride, of some kind of pride in people who are related to you. I mean, you can kind of see that happening in a conservative, where they constantly keep attacking them, and at a certain point, it's either you just keep imbibing that, or you snap back. You know what? Yeah. I am a colonizer, and you're welcome.
Yeah. Well, that's actually what got me on board initially. It was back in like the Trayvon Martin days, the first wave of Black Lives Matter, so to say. No, I mean, it didn't just red pill me. I had to go through a process of researching stuff like that. But one of the things that really struck me real hard was seeing the guys at my old high school who I had played rugby with, I thought of as my friends and my brothers and stuff like that. Basically seeing them post on social media that, white people are scum, we hate you, you're the cause of all our problems in life. I felt like, as a young man, I went to a racially diverse high school. Now, it wasn't one of these, ones like in the US, which are just like a nightmare, because it was mostly Asian. So not like that chaotic, but I as a young guy, I held out my hand, to them, and a lot of them just spat in my face. So yeah, definitely, I think for a lot of at least, especially the younger generation, I mean, your options are pretty much forever live in submission or actually stand up for yourself. And
it's only going to get worse, which means it's going to get much faster. I mean, it's kind of funny. It's like if you wanted to create a Fourth Reich, for lack of a better term, this would be the best way to go about it. This really would.
Yeah. I do wonder, had they overextended their hand. And I actually was listening to Kevin McDonald, and he actually said that he thought they hadn't because of the amount of power that they have. I like the Great Awakening, as they call it. That was planned. There's no doubt about that. It wasn't natural.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you could just look at the New York Times and the percentage of articles that had the word racism in it.
Google Ngram viewer. Yeah,
exactly. Like you put any word, privilege, racism, LGBT, so anything like that, and you'll just see at 2015 it just spikes like way off the charts. but yeah, I think that kind of maybe they realized they were in a bit of an unstable situation. They needed to, bring it up to the next tier, because, eventually a lot of the lies of multiculturalism were going to catch up to them, because, I'm not one of these people who thinks that, if we just went back to before, and I mean, none of us here are, of course, that, if we just went back to the 90s, then everything would be fine. I think, the realities of things like race and ethnicity and identity, that problem was created by the last 50 years of politics, and it was inevitable for that to happen. I think that, for me, I can only really have faith though in a reaction that is organized, though, because I don't think I think that a lot of people get the idea that things just need to get bad enough and then people will act. I think, though, that you need to actually have a body for someone to turn toward, and I think that that's what I'd like the dissident right to be. And one thing that I'd say was actually very positive this week, and now, of course, it was obviously not a positive situation, the tragic death of Canon Hinnant, and I take no joy out of it, but I take no joy out of the situation. But one thing that I thought was somewhat encouraging was the way that that had been just completely buried by the mainstream media, but it seemed like our guys had actually jumped on the story and were sharing it for 2 or 3 days, and eventually it trickled into to Conservative Inc. So then, PragerU and Matt Walsh and these people, I'm not a fan of them, but they eventually had to start taking it on board. Then it got to Fox News, and then CNN basically had no choice but to cover the story. And, that's just this huge, shocking story. And I think that Canon Hinnant has been somewhat different than other ones. There's been, we have hundreds of, if not thousands of examples of white people being brutally murdered in the last 5 years, even the last 5 years by not by non-whites. And I think that, Canon Hinnant might have been it might have been one of the turning points, that just how shocking it was, and how just revealed the media's, just the blatant hypocrisy of the media, that all they've been talking about for months and months and months is race, and how horrible white people are, yet they bury this story. And then the other thing is that there actually was a successful campaign to fund their family, and to actually hopefully, of course, nothing can ever make up for the loss of a 5-year-old son. No amount of money can ever atone for that, but hopefully it's able to give their remaining children the best life possible. They've raised, last time I checked, was over $700,000, which now keep in mind that the George Floyd lobby got over, George Floyd's family got over 14 million, but that's with the entirety of the international media backing you up. Canon Hinnant was just with the dissident right backing you up, and then eventually, that trickling outward. And the guy who was assaulted in Oregon, he has a GoFundMe, which is already over $100,000. So there definitely does seem to be, because you can't ignore just the racial aspects of these cases. And there does seem to be a portion of the population that is willing to actually get behind these. And I think that ultimately what it comes down to is actually having some kind of infrastructure for people to actually turn to. And that's kind of why I think that Trump would be the optimal outcome, is that it gives us more time to build infrastructure. But I guess what would you guys say to that, as in what would be like an effective way to actually go forward? I'll hand it over to Orwell.
Right. I am a firm believer in sort of metapolitical shifts and the promotion of lifestyles and ideals and activities which fall in line with what we would be traditionally considered to be right-wing activities. The GOP in America does not represent that voting bloc that Trump courted in 2000. I'm just trying to use sort of couch this in very euphemistic terms for obvious reasons, but I think that a Trump election would give another 4 years for the development of more infrastructure and for people to really see what's going on. Of course, one of the double-edged swords within the waiting game is the fact that the boomer voting bloc is going to continue to die off, and at a more increasing pace. So the last what has it been, like 2 or 3 months? The last 3 months have been one of the most polarizing and radical series of events that I've seen in modern political history.
Yeah, I didn't realize that the mainstream media was forced to comment on that case. That's really white pilling that grassroots dissident right people had that kind of influence. I actually didn't realize that they had that kind of influence. I thought that was just going to be another one of these cases that we see. I mean, like you said, there are thousands of cases like this a year, and this is one of the more egregious ones. But I did see a lot of leftists comment on it, and it really shows their racial hatred.
There was a Facebook group that had over 20,000 members saying free this murderer. I don't forget what his name was, but there's 20,000 people out there that think he should be freed and that he's a victim of racism or something like that. I mean, that just shows you where the left is.
That's astonishing. I had no idea.
Yeah,
it
was called Justice for Darius Sessoms. It was initially started as a troll and then actually got filled with the BLM and Antifa people who were downplaying Canon Hillen's murder and starting to blame his father Austin for supplying Darius, the alleged killer, with drugs, causing him to lack judgment on the fateful day.
Yeah, like I said, if you wanted to create a reactionary movement, this would be the way to do it. If you wanted white people to go back to sleep, what you should do is just drop all of this and pretend that race doesn't matter, and wait for white people to mix themselves out genetically. But that's not what they're going to do. They're going to double down and triple down and quadruple down, and give everyone that gets caught being racist on the internet a lot of extra free time to really think about what's happening. It's not a good strategy. So I guess the way forward is to try to press the adjacent media in a similar strategy to how this was done. I don't know who on the dissident right led this case, because it does seem like someone, at a grassroots level, a group of people pushed this, but good on them. And if someone knows, they need to get more resources to those people. They need to get more networks to those people for retweets and upvotes and likes and everything, because that person knows what's up and they know how to get it done.
Yeah, I mean, I think. Oh yeah, go ahead, Orwell.
I was just going to say, on a quick side note, apart from the guy who got beaten up in Portland and Canon Hillen's father, those two separate grocery store, one was a Target cashier and the other one was a Kroger manager. They both made over 5 figures on GoFundMe's to send them on holidays after they were harassed by blue checkmark creatures.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, it is good that with the left, I don't know if we're going to actually ever have the same amount of, we're not going to have the same amount of money as the left that control central banks, but it is encouraging that there actually does seem to be a slowly but surely growing financial support base for the right wing. And I think that ultimately is essentially what we actually need to make change. One thing I do wonder is, will some of the elites actually have a conscience going forward? Because, we can talk about the, Swiss bankers, so to say, or the tribe, whatever we want to call them. But, there are a lot of Gentile elites out there, and a lot of them have children. They're not going to be allowed to be allowed to be elites in this future global homo world order. They're not even going to be allowed to be middle managers or anything like that. I have to wonder, will some of them get a conscience? And I think ultimately, I mean, we are looking pretty far into the future here. I don't know I think this, could be maybe a decade or so away. But I think that ultimately, in order to restore order, like I had mentioned usually happens in history, I think some of the elites will have to get a conscience. And I'd say from the dissident right perspective, I think we need to have like something that's worthy of them actually turning toward. Kevin McDonald has said that if there was just one billionaire that was on our side, think about the amount of stuff we can change. I think that this is probably a good place to finish. I guess what I'd probably say is that because I always like to end on a good note, is that you have to remember that it's asymmetrical warfare going on here. They have all the money in the world. They have every single media corporation, all these Fortune 500 companies, and all the entire academy on their side. We started out with a couple of guys on Twitter and a couple of YouTube channels, and it seems like slowly but surely, things are meta-politically going in the right direction. Well, not in the right direction overall, but meta-politically, it does seem like we are actually getting some of our ideas in. And I just hope that I think that ultimately you just need infrastructure and funding around it to make the big change. Do any of you guys have any final words before we finish? Question?
No. Whoever did that that media campaign, good on them. I didn't realize it was so successful. I really thought nothing would come of it. This would just be ignored.
I don't know if it was one person, but people just found it and started retweeting.
Well, some kind of organization was used, whether that's like a group chat or some kind of, someone focused on that and made it an issue and didn't just let it go.
Yeah, and it does. Oh yeah, go ahead.
That's it.
Well, yeah. For once, we've just seen these stories for years, all these horrible crimes, and it seems for once they actually were forced to talk about it. Orwell, do you have any thing you'd like to say before we're done?
Not really. Just subscribe to Endeavor and throw him some donations if you haven't already, and go check out our streams. We stream on Tuesdays and Fridays on the channel Orwell Goode at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, but we are going to be coming to an end at probably about halfway through next month for other ventures.
Yeah, I'm gutted that you guys are going to be stopping the streams, because I know that yeah, I know you mentioned that you guys were going to be finishing it, but I really have enjoyed the streams you guys have been doing for the last few weeks. But I'll have you maybe sometime in the future. I'll have you guys back on, and we can talk about all the craziness going on in the world. Sometime in the future, hopefully when things are starting to look more positive. So anyway, definitely check out their channel. They do some interesting streams. They've done a lot of good coverage on the events of the last couple months. And I just want to read one more Entropy chat from Galileo's Tongue. Really interesting stream, guys. All the best from the UK. Okay, so that's all for tonight. And one more announcement. My new video is just about finished, and it will be out on Friday. And it's been one I've thoroughly enjoyed making, and it's about something positive for a change. So I know this stream was kind of a downer, but we finished on a high note, and hopefully you enjoy the video on Friday. It's one that I actually enjoyed making. So anyway, keep an eye out for that, and till next time, Endeavor.